Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/ytaxp and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show asking you to turn your head and cough. I'm Christy Powell. My co-host tonight is one tongue depressor short of a pap smear. Welcome, Nate Smith.
Christy, my tongue is the least depressed part of my anatomy. Thank you very much. But
I don't even want to try and unpack any of that, but we have missed you, buddy. Glad you're here. And also joining us again tonight is writer and researcher. Welcome, Dianna Anderson.
Hi, I am so glad to be here. I am a writer out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, non-binary. I use the pronouns they, them. And I have a book coming out next summer about non-binary history and identity and memoir.
Wow. Hopefully we can get a link to that in the show notes and you can get me a signed copy.
I'll talk to my publisher.
Wow. So tonight, folks, we are talking about everybody's favorite simple and completely nonpartisan subject, gender and healthcare. So give us a call. We want to hear your stories. We want to hear your questions for Dianna. Give us a call, folks. It's 512-991-9242 or on the internets at tiny.cc/callsex because the show is coming right now.
All right. Well, that sound means that we are starting this week, as we do every week, with what's turning us on this week. Dianna, what's turning you on this week?
So I've been wanting to watch it for a while, but I finally sat down and rented it on Amazon and watched Underwater. It's a 2020 horror film starring Kristen Stewart, and it is really, really good. It is the story of a scientific research mission / American capitalist company at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and it's a bottom of the sea mystery. It's really good.
Perfect. I know that everybody loves to hate K-Stu, but I think she's doing great work. I think that her status as a queer icon is starting to break through all of the Twilight hate that was heaped on for so many years. I guess everybody can make up their own mind, but I hear that. It's turning you on. I'm happy to check it out. Nate, what's turning you on this week?
Well, tonight it's going to be sort of what's turning me off.
Uh-huh.
And you know what really grinds my gears, Christy?
Why'd you hit me?
Bigotry really grinds my gears. So I want to shine a light on the recent one-day boycott of Twitch due to the epidemic of hate raiding. So for those of the audience who might not be gamers, Twitch is a streaming platform for gaming. Content creators stream live video games. Viewers subscribe for a small fee or they donate directly, and Twitch takes 50% of those earnings in exchange. So Twitch has a function that's called a raid, which typically means at the end of a stream, the streamer is going to take all their viewers into someone else's stream, right? So they raid their friend's stream. So it's meant to promote your friend's content, share viewers, foster community, right? Like a raid is usually a good thing. However, due to this epidemic of hate raiding and bot raiding, this past week, 14,000 streamers participated in a one-day boycott, which impacted Twitch's total viewership to the tune of 5 to 15%. So, what's a hate raid, you might ask? Well, it's where a bunch of bigots join a stream and spam their channel with hateful comments, with bots that crowd the chat with malicious links, hate speech, typically disrupting the stream, creating a huge hassle for the streamer and their moderators. And can either of you guess whom these attacks are directed at? I'll give you one guess.
Well, it's the internet and there's hatred involved.
Yeah.
I'm gonna lean towards trans folks.
Mhm.
Hey, and Christy nails it. That's right. Yes, it's trans folks, it's people of color, it's gay men, it's women, it's Enby folks. Basically, anybody who isn't a straight white douchebag. And Twitch has done very little to combat this growing problem. And if you listen to the experience of the content creators that are enduring this shit, it's getting worse. So, to end my rant, how can our audience help? So you can let Twitch know that you are an ally. You can tweet them using the hashtag #ADayOffTwitch. If you consume this content, you can support your favorite creators without giving Twitch their cut until they fix this. So that could mean you donate through Patreon, you donate through PayPal. It could even mean watching their streams on other platforms, YouTube Gaming, Facebook, or just telling your favorite streamer that you're on their side and that you're doing what you can to shine a light on this, because we in the community and we as marginalized parts of as marginalized demographics, we cannot allow ourselves to be pushed around and bullied. So whether you are a gamer or not, supporting folks who are enduring this crap is so important and will help us be a part of a better 21st century society. So just to wrap up real quick, if you're a streamer affected by this and you're watching, the SecX audience and the ACA, we are behind you. Keep fighting. Visibility is important. Do not quit. And we can fix this if we stick together.
All right, I love it. A little bit of an anger boner for the Twitch boycott on right now. Definitely encourage folks to be aware and to just, like you said, Nate, remind all of the trans and NB folks out there that we want their content. We want to hear their voices, and the democratizing power of the internet should not be subjected to hate raids and bullshit and bigotry. I appreciate you you shining a spotlight on that. Are y'all ready to jump into the interview a little bit?
Yeah.
Born ready, Christy. Let's dive in.
All right, well, let's do it. We're talking about MDs and NBs. We're talking about the medical establishment and how it may or may not be serving our non-binary folks. So let's begin, Diana, by talking about those two little checkboxes, the male and the female. I have to imagine that our current healthcare setup can be pretty invalidating for NB folks. What can you tell us?
It's really frustrating as a non-binary person to walk in and try to get healthcare when you are restricted to one of two sets. And everything ends up being dehumanizing because you have to either spend your time constantly being misgendered or constantly correcting people. For example, when I had an unfortunate incident and had to go to the ER last year, I was constantly being gendered as she and called ma'am and doing all these things because I'm marked as female in my medical records because I was assigned female at birth, even though I'm non-binary. And at that time, it was just this dehumanization level that was on top of me already having an emergent healthcare problem. And so it ends up restricting your willingness to go into the doctor because you know it's going to be a battle. It ends up being a problem for communicating exactly what your healthcare needs are because people make a lot of assumptions based on those boxes. And it's dehumanizing just simply on a linguistic level because I will get emails about, it's time to come in for your well woman visit. And I'm like, I'm not a woman. It's not a well woman visit if I'm not a woman. So
doesn't apply.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, in my limited experience working in corporate healthcare, in that setting, even people who are clinicians, nurses, psychiatrists, doctors, I mean, everybody in that setting, even the folks that were eager to respect gender identities, were kind of hamstrung by that
Mhm.
very like two box system. And even a lot of the like so-called accommodations that we would make for trans folks were incredibly dehumanizing. What kinds of stories can you tell us? What have you seen?
Yeah, there is. You have to, if you want, like, if you're non-binary, there's not a spot for them to like put that on your sheet, so they have to make special notes of this person uses they them, or this person has this specific need. And not everyone who you see in a doctor's visit is going to read those notes. So I walked in earlier this summer for a consult with a surgeon talking about top surgery, and the clerk at the desk greeted me as ma'am, and I was
Mm-hmm.
like, "That's you are working in a clinic that services genderqueer people. Like,
Yeah.
training is a thing." And also, it's very often like in how people, when you're doing like establishing care things where you're filling out forms, how they choose to represent the boxes too can make a difference, because some cis people have written like new forms to try and be inclusive, but they end up with man, woman, trans or something like
Right.
that, and you're
Yeah.
like,
Right.
that
And
also
that
doesn't
was
work.
really what I saw working in a hospital where it was generally two people to a room, and
Mhm.
generally you were housed with somebody of your gender. But if somebody was trans, then they just got their own room. And
Yeah.
like we would certain employees would put effort and intention behind using correct pronouns, behind using correct names and these different things, but every single form still had
Mhm.
a legal name. It still had a assigned at birth gender, and all of these things stamped on it. And it was incredibly alienating for folks that were looking to heal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also very hard, especially if you have started going by a new name but haven't updated it in your medical records yet, because that's part of how they confirm that you are who you are, is
Sure.
by asking for your legal name. So they come in and they're constantly dead naming you all the time because they have to make
Often
sure.
in
Yeah.
front of people that you wouldn't
Hmm.
necessarily share that information
Yeah.
with.
So it ends up being very frustrating just to navigate a basic doctor's visit.
Yeah.
What
Well,
what
I
field I'm sorry, Christy. What
mhm.
if you could choose one field or one box to add to those forms? What would it be?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would, instead of having the gender section be a checkbox thing,
Mhm.
just a line where I can write in non-binary,
Sure.
trans mask, something
Brilliant.
like that.
That is a
And so,
great answer to my great question. Thank you, Deanna.
Yeah, I mean, well, and it highlights something else here that we so often have this kind of conceptualization that is like male, female, and other. I
mhm,
feel
Yeah.
like whether we're talking
Yeah.
about people who are binary trans, that are not the gender that they were assigned at birth, but that do fit into a male or female category,
mhm,
or whether we're talking about somebody who is more gender fluid, or specifically in this conversation about folks who are non-binary, we just don't see people's gender in any sort of sincere way. It's sort of like
mhm.
male, female, and okay, asterisk. And
Yeah.
so for that reason, I have to assume that there are a lot of barriers to accessing things like HRT or other gender affirming care when somebody is non-binary and doesn't want to fall into the opposite sex, if I can use that term, or somebody who
Yeah.
is trans but binary.
Yeah. There's a lot of our current system of trans healthcare that basically posits that transition has an end point, and that you are going from being this to being this other completely opposite thing. And so it assumes that you will be taking HRT, that you'll be wanting these surgeries, that you'll be doing this. And thankfully, we've been moving away from that model, especially in like more progressive areas like where I live. But it's still, even like for doctors who are progressive on these things, they still have these requirements and regulations that they have to follow. So for non-binary people who, like me, don't really want to take HRT, that means some aspects of surgical transition will be cut off for me. I can't do that unless I am on HRT for a number.
Because you're not on the transition escalator, if I can use that term.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where I would love to be able to like pick and choose what parts of my care I wanted, because that's part of what being non-binary is. And stuff, but because of the requirements and regulations, which are often written by cis people who have, if they've spoken to trans people, they've spoken to binary trans people. And so very often the system that's set up is to make sure that when a person transitions, they pass as the other gender. That's got a really long history in trans healthcare. And it's one of the ways in which non-binary people who don't want to pass as like, I don't want to pass as a man, I don't want to pass as a woman, I want people to look at me and go, what? So that's part of the thing, is that there's no healthcare like path for that, because it's built so much on that binary model.
Well, I know that statistics around trans issues are few and far between and basically non-existent when we're particularly talking about non-binary folks. But what can you tell us about the scope of these issues?
Yeah, we don't have good stats on how many trans people there are in the US, partly because there are a lot of questions of how to count us in the census. It's not because like some binary trans people who like got their surgeries in their 80s and stuff and has been living as their gender for decades and stuff, will just tick box whatever gender they identify with on the census and things like that. So they end up being grouped back into cis. And we don't have a way to identify really non-binary or trans in any of those. So we don't have a lot of good data on it. I went looking for data on healthcare systems and stuff, and we don't, like in the US or in the UK or in Canada, we don't have really good publication on those, because for one, we didn't actually start studying it until like within the last decade, and the studies that existed before then were extremely flawed. So as far as I know, we don't have numbers, but we do know from surveys of like Gen Z that like of the group of Gen Z that identifies as LGBT, 25% of them identify as non-binary. So we know that it's a big category.
Yeah, that's definitely a larger discussion, and certainly a confusing one that we as a culture and as a society are still working to wrap our head around. But I think it's really fascinating to see the generational shifts and how, as we make these identities less expensive socially to glob onto or to connect with, how they become much more common. And it's fascinating to think about how at the end of my lifetime, these things may be not just normalized, but much more common, simply because there's so many fewer barriers to actually acknowledging them. This is one of those barriers that we need to figure out in order for our kids to have the opportunity to feel safe being themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I want my niece in South Dakota, like if she's my oldest niece is 10 right now, but if she gets to be like 15, 16 and comes out as non-binary or whatever, I want her to have access to the same care that I do just across the border in Minnesota. And I know because of the governments of those two states, it's not the same.
Yeah, well, so what is some of the impact here? If we don't have particular numbers, what kinds of problems are these policies or just these systems causing?
You end up with a lot of people slipping through the cracks because there aren't like in South Dakota, there's not really a whole lot of great trans care and stuff. And because of that, people don't go to the doctor because of how they'll be treated. They don't seek a lot of things for like basic medical problems that could be resolved quickly, and stuff because of that mistreatment. And it ends up causing a lot of trans people to fall into medical debt, to have to self-manage their own HRT, which can be dangerous. There are safe ways to do it, and I encourage, like, if that's what's available to you, to do all the research you can on it and stuff. But it ends up with trans people just sort of having to cobble together what we might have available and what we have to figure out for ourselves, and that can cause a lot of problems in terms of like expenses, trips to the ER, things like that. So
yeah, I've definitely seen that just in my small little porthole into this world as a therapist, talking to folks who are impacted by all of this. I have worked with so many people that feel incredibly uncomfortable having even the most basic conversation with their doctor. And honestly, I work with a lot of trans or Enby youth that frankly have at this point like earned an associate's in hospital management because of all of the effort that they've had to go through to self-advocate and to understand.
I kind of see what Christy was going on, is that trans people are forced to be the autodidacts of their own medical care, which is kind of and one thing I wanted to say too was I mean, I have an even smaller porthole than Christy does as a cis man, not a straight cis man, but a cis man, is that normalization really is so important to this issue, right? When people can feel comfortable with the, you know, with the line instead of the box, you know, that opens up the door for the next generation to be a little more comfortable with it, or to have a little bit more comfortable of a conversation with their child about it, like you were saying. And I'm just curious, do you see progress? I think I do here in Canada. I think we're getting better despite the odd setback. But what do you think, Dianna? Are we moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of progress that's happening in a lot of ways, and stuff. There's a lot more resources and support, and actual just like visibility for trans kids and for trans adolescents, and stuff. I know in a lot of places, trans healthcare has become much more accessible for people, even in like areas that you wouldn't expect, more rural, more red areas, especially in the US. There are still a lot of barriers with it, but it's becoming more normalized for people to be out as themselves, as their true, authentic selves, which is great.
Yeah,
couldn't agree more.
Y'all are hearing me now, yeah?
Yes. Yep.
Cool. I think I unplugged my microphone because when I talk about my trans youth and some of the arguments that I've had to have on behalf of my clients with doctors and things like that, I get a little animated. So I think I unplugged my microphone. But yeah, this is incredibly frustrating territory. Do we have any meaningful outcome data around what this discrimination looks like in non-binary healthcare?
We don't have it for non-binary specifically, but we do know that the outcomes for trans people who are denied healthcare or who are unable to get it, especially among teens and stuff, can result in increased depression, increased anxiety, increased suicidal ideation. It ends up creating this like domino effect of mental health issues. So it's
And, you know, I look forward to the day where we can actually start to calculate these numbers, but I feel like I also dread it. You know, when I look at some of the statistics released by the Trevor Project, for instance, as they describe the huge prevalence of queer youth suicide and these different things,
Yeah.
they're all absolutely devastating. And I guess I would just say that I recognize that this topic that we're talking about tonight can feel a little niche in certain ways. Like if you're listening to this as a podcast or sitting in front of the TV and listening to this conversation and you're not non-binary, healthcare is not the most interesting topic. Like I can see how it can be really easy to have your eyes gloss over a little bit. But as somebody who, has spent a lot of time kind of like wrist deep in the blood of trans folks as they are trying to navigate these spaces, it is just absolutely exhausting. And I'm really excited to see that we're at least having these conversations and that there's some sense of hopefulness and some possibility to see some change. But before we go too much deeper with all of this, Nate, do you have any phone calls that you'd like to bring up for us?
We do have some phone calls waiting, and I just wanted to say that I think we are moving in the right direction, and I think that for the cis people that might be watching and hopefully aren't having their eyes gloss over, there are more of us out there than you might think. And just being an advocate is going to make is going to make it easier for the person that might be on the spectrum that you don't know about to be honest with you and to have a more frank and honest relationship with you. So there's a real case to be made for advocacy there. But we have Lee on the line. Lee is calling in from Washington, and Lee's got a great question. He is wondering about how to talk to his 10-year-old daughter about expressing same-sex attraction. Lee, did I get that right? Welcome, you're on the air.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're in the ballpark. My 10-year-old daughter has been talking for past few months now. She keeps asking me how I would view her if she was attracted to her same gender.
Okay.
And some of the things, one is I keep trying to avoid is I'm trying to normalize it for her.
Good start.
My first reaction was to say something along the lines of, "Hey, you know what? You can love who you want to love. It's not an issue." But I refrain myself from saying that because she's having a hard time with it. She feels like she's abnormal. So I don't want to put the words choice in there because then she can think, well, this isn't normal, and if I can choose, then I'll just be attracted to boys. So I want to refrain from using choice and all that kind of stuff from the language, and so yeah, and I understand from a lot of. And if I use improper language, please correct me because I'm way out of my field here and comfort zone. So if I use the improper language, please correct me.
You're doing well so far, Lee. Go on.
So from what I've heard from a lot of gay people and the LGBT plus community is they realize at a very young age where their leanings were. So I don't want to dismiss it as a phase on the off chance that it's not, and I'd like to be able to help her navigate through these feelings that she's having, because the most concerning thing is she feels it's wrong. And I don't know why that is, because my wife and I are relatively, open and accepting of pretty much any lifestyle. We've made no secret of that. So it may be coming from her friends at school. I don't know. She, all of her, they're getting interested in boys now, I guess. And she feels like, I guess, on the outskirts of that. So anyways, I've rambled enough, but I just wanted to get some resources and advice on how to properly help her navigate through her feelings.
Sure. I will defer to those among those around me that have master's degrees and associate's degrees, and then I will give you my layperson's perspective as the parent of 2 bisexual daughters. So either one of y'all, whichever one wants to jump in.
Sure. I'll go ahead and go first and just say, Lee, I recognize that this is a little bit awkward or uncomfortable for you, and it is important enough to feel a little bit anxious about. Like, this matters, right? So a little bit of nervousness is appropriate for that reason alone. At the same time, if she's having these types of conversations with you at 10, I feel super confident about what you're doing and about the direction that you're heading in. That's not to say that this isn't an important time and that it doesn't matter what you say, but I do want to suggest that if you're already having these types of conversations, you're in really, really good shape. So that tension, that nervousness that you're feeling, I'm going to let you have a little bit of permission to kind of take your hands off the reins and not stress and strain over it so much. The most important piece is I feel like you're already hitting on. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
No, I apologize. I talked over you. The nervousness for me isn't so much with the subject matter. It's I don't want to say the wrong thing that's going to cause her to kind of not derail, that's too strong of a word, but it's going to cause her to, I don't know. I just don't want to say the wrong thing to her. Like I said, the whole concept of choice and you can choose who you love, I immediately removed that from the vocabulary because no, it's not a choice. This is not a choice for you. This is who you are as a person.
And we could have some nuanced conversation about how, your attraction is not a choice, but who you are in a relationship is a choice. And we would hope that you would choose to be with people that you're attracted to. And, there's some value in all of that, but she's 10. So I think that the most valuable thing that you can do is to continue to encourage her to be herself, to know that whoever herself is fine and great and wonderful. I'd like to say that you could treat this the same as cis attraction and not denormalize it by talking about the distinctions between being gay and straight. But I also know that eventually being gay or bi or pan or whatever label she eventually comes to is probably going to come with some extra barriers. And, we'd like to hope that as she grows older, those barriers will get lower and lower. But even now, I'm sure that she's feeling some of that pressure. So it's okay to acknowledge that bigotry exists. It's okay to talk to her about the fact that, some people feel this way and that's wrong. But more than anything, I think that if you just continue to reinforce the idea that you love her, that she is great however she is, and that whoever she loves is great with you, that you've already done 95% of the work and the rest of it you'll figure out as you go. I don't at all want to dismiss your question or make it sound like I'm saying, it's fine, because these are incredibly important issues. But more than anything, I would encourage you to have some compassion for yourself. Recognize that it's okay that you may not know exactly what to say, that you may not say exactly the right thing. But the more consistently you gently say, I love you, however you are, the better off you're going to be. And no one thing that you say anxiously is going to make this situation turn on its heel. The way that you've been raising her is going to continue to be relevant.
I would also.
I appreciate. The main thing that I've been trying to do is just really normalize it. It's you're not weird. It's not a weird thing. It's who you are. I told her the other day that, and I don't know if this is the right thing or not, but she's like, well, all my friends like boys. I'm like, baby, you like tater tots instead of French fries. It's still potatoes.
Yeah.
It's still
Excellent
love.
analogy.
It's still potatoes. They're still people. I like it.
Yeah, I would also, because she's only 10, you can let her know that she has time to figure this stuff out. She doesn't have to know right now. One of my favorite stories about a cousin of mine was when she was 13, she turned to her mom and went, I don't know what I am yet. I'm okay with that. And it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, even if she does turn out to be disappointingly straight and cis or whatever, she's still got time to figure that out. She's only 10.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could offer you my three tidbits of layman's wisdom, it's that one line that helped me talking to my children about their sexuality is that it's not something you choose, it's something that you're going to discover, right? Like and there is no destination, right? It's something you're going to develop over time. you don't like Dianna said, you don't have to choose, because it's a process of discovery. It's not a process of choice. Second, I would say try to listen more than you talk. Encourage your kids to talk to you. It sounds like you've done an amazing job already, but listen more, talk less. And third, end each of those conversations with a hug.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
and I'm sorry, I didn't catch what I got. Christy and I got Dianna, and I didn't catch the third person's name, and I apologize.
I don't matter. Don't worry about it, Lee.
Come on, man, you definitely matter.
I'm Nate.
We all matter. Nate, I apologize, Nate. Do any of you have any reading material you'd recommend? Any books or any articles or any of that type of stuff that could just help navigate this landscape a little bit?
Yeah, so you're cribbing a little bit from my notes for the end of the show, and so I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more, but I'll say that sexpositivefamilies.com is the absolute best resource that I can ever point to in these types of situations. We were lucky enough to have Melissa Carney on this show a couple of years ago. She has put together an incredible collection of resources. You can break it down by the age of your child, by the gender of your child, by the particular issue that you're looking to address or discuss. Sex Positive Families is a remarkable organization. I don't know myself of a particular book that I would point towards, but I know that they're going to have a really wonderful collection of things to take a look at. And I just can't say enough nice things about everything that they've got together at that website.
Perfect. I'll definitely take a look at that.
Awesome. Well, Lee, I want to thank you very much for calling in. That was a great conversation. And kudos to you. Like, I wish that I had a dad like you when I was 10. The world needs more dads like you, Lee. Is there anything you wanted to say before we let you go?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Also, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to RFR. I was chatting with them a couple of days ago about this issue.
Cool.
And great organization. They were very instrumental. Kind of pointed me towards you guys a little bit. I've heard of you guys before, but I've never watched the show. I hear it plugged all the time. I just never watched it because, honestly, it didn't really apply until now. I hope that's okay.
Sure. No, I'll tell you what, we actually did an episode just last week in more detail about how to talk to your kids about sexuality and how to raise good allies and all of those types of things. So if you didn't catch the show last week, that episode may actually serve your purposes really well here.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely check that out. Absolutely, we'll check that out. And then also, last thing, the call screener I spoke to. I don't know what her name was, but she was amazing. She was fantastic.
Hey, well, we'll pass it on. Thank you so much for the compliment. I'm really glad that we were here and able to help. And please stay in touch. Let us know how these conversations go. Feel free to shoot us an email or to give us a call. We'd love to hear how these things progress and offer you whatever support we can.
Appreciate it. Will do. And thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Take
Lee.
care.
All right, you guys have a good one.
And as a former helpline agent for Recovering from Religion and community moderator for those folks, I would like to reiterate Lee's endorsement that the folks over at Recovering Religion that work the helpline are some of the best, most empathetic, helpful folks that I have ever met in my career as an activist. That is admittedly fairly short, but they actually sent me the way of the atheist community of Austin, and I am eternally grateful. And I'm sure somebody in the chat is posting all the RFR links right now. But yes, if great resource to use. Absolutely.
Yeah, check out recoveringfromreligion.org. Really great organization.
Yes. Dr. Ray is a real sweetheart. Don't tell him I said that, though. Okay,
well,
so
who
Christy,
else you got for us?
do we want to take a call? Do we want to take an email? What do we want to do? What do you think? We've got a couple of calls waiting.
We do. We've got some great calls on the line, but I'll tell you what, I'm very curious to hear Diana's response to this email. So if you want to hit on that, let's do it.
Okay, let's go to the mailbag. And in the mailbag, we have a letter that is addressed to somebody. It's rather cheeky intro. But the question here is, usually in a general letter, we would write the phrase, "to whom it may concern," which to me seems gender neutral, but also somewhat archaic and possibly overly formal. Letters to businesses have often started with "Dear Sir" or "Madam," which again is a gender specific thing that we were talking about moving away from. I have no idea who the reader is, but I want to be more appropriate than this archaic form. So the writer goes on to say, as I have to teach writing and I want to also grow and learn myself, I would like to ask this community what we think, because what we think is appropriate. And thanks us in advance for addressing this. So, a toss-up. Who wants to jump in first?
I'll head off first. If
yeah, I'm definitely going to defer.
Yeah, this is something that as a non-binary person, I get asked a lot, especially like, what gender neutral term do you prefer instead of sir or ma'am? And I'm like, hey, you is fine with me. But like for more formal settings, that's not okay. So I try to go with either the person's name, if I know what it is, or if it's, say, a cover letter for a job, I will say, "Dear hiring manager," or go by their title and position. Because that usually is generic enough. It doesn't require me to try and figure out, like, if the person is a woman, whether or not they're married, so I know whether to use Miss or Mrs., all that sort of stuff. So I just go by their job title, or I will say "to whom it may concern" on certain things, because
that's still an acceptable default if you're not able to identify a particular group or title or anything else. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. I think even just addressing the name of the business itself or the name of the entity itself is a viable option. Especially, if you're writing a business letter, you're probably addressing a corporate entity. So why not just address that corporate entity instead of attempting to address, a person that you don't know? Like, "Dear Wells Fargo," "Dear Amazon Processing Center," right?
Yep. Yeah, and with those, that is totally fine because that's the name they've given you. So
right.
Yeah. And corporations are basically people, so it works, right? It works.
Horrible people, but yes, people.
Yeah.
Sorry. As if
Sorry, we're not
gender and
gonna go
healthcare
there.
wasn't enough. Okay. Well, let's take this opportunity to take a look at what else is going on around the ACA.
Because, when you have some sex toys and they get kind of old, and when you start pulling them out, you're like, I don't think I can use this anymore.
Ooh,
kind of
and drinking babies.
Yeah, drinking babies, right? A nice, refreshing glass of babies. Now, I guess that would fall into the atheist mythos there.
Homosexuals getting married just destroys Christianity or something. Like somehow they're coming to attack you. They didn't invite you to the wedding. Maybe these people are still like upset about that.
Christy, I'm gonna give you a safe word, okay?
Sure.
And if that's all right, and the safe word is pumpkin.
I got a pumpkin out. Out. Thank you, Kevin.
Can we talk about vaginas again?
There's going to be so much. Next week is just going to be clips of me and you saying vagina.
A vagina.
Mental vagina? Mental vagina. Vagina?
Yeah.
Vagina. Vagina? Vagina.
Vaginas. Vaginas.
Vagina, Chad. Vagina. Don't say vaginas.
Vagina.
Mine and Jenna's mental vagina.
Wait.
Vagina.
Vagina.
My mental vagina.
Crew. Vagina.
And just for you, for your birthday.
Yes.
Vagina.
Oh, man. Of all the highlight clips that I've seen, that is like That
Yeah,
is
I
top
love
three.
that the YouTube comments are more and more skewing to like, oh, the ACA only wants to talk about sex and trans people. Like, all right, fucking fine. Let's just count how many times we can sneak the word vagina into things. Love it, love it. All right.
Oh,
Well,
boy.
let's talk a little bit more here about what we can be doing to support NB folks in their healthcare. I mean, what are some short-term solutions? Because I know that we're talking about like big systemic problems that are really they extend beyond healthcare. They really talk about the way we see gender as a culture and as a society. But is there a way to, without upending the whole apple cart, actually support NB folks in the way that they access healthcare under our current system?
Yeah, there are a number of different ways depending on what position you're in healthcare. And stuff. If you are a healthcare provider and stuff, one way that you can make things easier is to make sure that you ask people their pronouns, ask them like what specific language they would like you to use, and that sort of stuff, just to let them know that you are a person that they can come talk to. One of my favorite things about my doctor is that, like, when I came out to her, she was like, oh, okay, do you want references to our gender care coordinator? Like, what sort of things are you looking for? And stuff, and made a note, like, in my file that I'm they, them, and everything. And so, like, that's in my medical records. And it was really great to know that coming out to her wasn't going to be a battle because of how she had treated me beforehand. So that's something that individual healthcare providers can do to help their patients feel more comfortable. It's just that sort of bedside banner thing. But there's also for like people who are allies and things like that, you can volunteer to be their advocate if they are in the hospital or something and they need somebody alongside them, because being in the hospital is really tiring. And if you have somebody else there who's willing to say, her name is this, or whatever like that, that can be really helpful. And that's something you can discuss with your friend beforehand, if there's any sort of thing with that. And then also to provide resources for non-binary people of the language that they need, the specific things that they need to ask for. There are lots of online resources for binary trans folks for what specific things they need to ask for in a healthcare situation, because sometimes you go in and you're like, I don't know, I just want to transition, I just want to do some stuff, and there are a bunch of different things. So making sure that people have access to that information is really important in terms of just making these little individual changes to help people navigate the system.
Yeah, are there any particular strategies for NB folks to better navigate these systems? I mean, what would you recommend to somebody who's watching this who is non-binary themselves and is not really sure how to talk to a doctor about some of these issues?
Yeah, I would first talk to other non-binary people about their experiences and stuff. There are, I believe in the show notes, we're going to have a couple of Facebook groups for non-binary people navigating transition care. And stuff. And so those are a lot of really good resources. But I would also remember that you are the expert on you. Your doctor may be able to run tests and may have
such an important message
to do diagnosis, but you are the one who is in your head and you know what your gender is, you know what you're thinking about, or you know you need to talk to somebody who is a therapist or something to qualify, to like figure that all out. So remember that you're the expert in this situation and you have the power to say no. If you're feeling pushed into something, if you are feeling shoved into a path that you don't want to take, you have the power to stop it if you want to. If somebody's like, oh, okay, so we'll get you on tea or whatever and stuff, you have the power to stop and wait as well if you are nervous about something.
Yeah, and you mentioned those Facebook groups that are in the show notes for this episode that I would invite people who are looking for resources to check out. But to me, that highlights maybe the most effective part of all of this that I've seen, which is just self-advocacy groups, being in community. I mean, I want to say in particular, the non-binary community is remarkably impressive at how well it has self-identified and organized and is self-supporting. And I would say to anybody who is outside of the conventional gender expectations, if you are not talking to other folks of your gender or who are queer allies alongside you, you're really missing out on so many opportunities to just better understand these systems. We couldn't possibly address all of the questions on a show like this, but I would say that there's so much value in being a part of a group like that and having other people to talk to for good referrals, for good advice, for honestly just support around a lot of these topics and an opportunity to bitch to somebody who actually understands what's going on.
Yeah. And I will say, if you want to come on Twitter and like complain with me or something, I am more than happy to have more non-binary people around.
Well, I know that a lot of this conversation can feel like a referendum on how we treat gender as a whole in our society. And I know we don't have time here to give like a full course on gender theory, but what would you encourage the audience watching to be aware of in this space?
Yeah, I would encourage people to watch for how some things are unnecessarily gendered. Like what I mentioned with like calling a pap smear / gynecological visit a well woman visit. I mean, that's a euphemism that was maybe good in the 50s, but it doesn't work now for a gender diverse community that we have. It didn't work well then anyway, I would say, either, because it was too euphemistic. So using the specific language that is about the specific anatomy or whatever that's referenced and things like that is really just much more precise and more empowering, I think, because it's like, oh, people with uteruses tend to experience this, can let people who are in that group either select in or select out in terms of what they're going to listen to, and stuff like that. And that's much more precise than saying women or whatever like that. So that's something that I would love just on a linguistic level to see changed, is just how we talk about these things.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of overlap too with what our caller was talking about with how to talk to your children about sex. And one of the things that I tried to do, and one of the things that I try to tell others to do, is not to use those infantilizing terms like pee-pee and wee-wee. Like, refer to the anatomy as it is. Make it known that saying penis, saying vagina, even 20 times in one podcast is perfectly okay. It's a part of the human anatomy, and you don't have to blush when you say it, right? You've probably got one or the other, so it doesn't have to be weird to talk about it.
Yeah. And that's something we've done. My brother and sister-in-law have done with their kids, and like I've supported them in that, is like just letting them have the language that they need.
Yes.
And that includes not stigmatizing things about gender and sexuality.
Right.
And stuff. Like my 10-year-old niece the other day was apparently asked, how does gay sex work? And my sister-in-law sat down and explained, like, this is how two cis men would, do it. And she was like, oh, okay. That's kind of strange, but because she's a 10-year-old.
I mean, as if straight sex is not weird, as if the idea of like talking meat just slapping against each other is not like inherently weird and gross and silly and fun and beautiful and sexy.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things where it's just like, oh, okay. And then she moved on and started doing whatever she wanted to do with that day. It doesn't have to be like this anxious, hard conversation.
No.
And I know so many folks can feel like, oh my gosh, like, is the particular pronoun that we use, if we say a word like woman instead of a person with a uterus, like, does that really matter? Do we really need to cater to a small minority? And first of all, yes, we do need to cater to all human beings. That's what being inclusive is about. but also there are like meaningful impacts to these things. I mean, here in Texas, and I mean, of course, nationwide, we've been having a renewed conversation around abortion. And even media outlets or pundits or people that you might generally look to as good examples of how to use language appropriately are oftentimes talking about how now women can no longer get abortions and about how this is a women's health issue and things like that. And that really does lead to negative outcomes for people with uteruses that do not identify as women, and makes it even that much harder to access these services that are I guess, evaporating in so many ways. That's if we want to get me mad enough to unplug my microphone again, we can keep talking about this this ongoing abortion issue here in Texas.
Yeah.
But I do want to stress that yes, words can seem like a unsubstantive issue to get worked up about, but words mean things. They drive these conversations, and then they drive the decisions that those conversations lead to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Language serves us, not the other way around. For sure.
Yeah. An
Yeah.
important reminder. Otherwise, unless either of you have any more to say, I know that this is obviously like, how do we identify gender in our society is much too big of a conversation for this podcast. But I want to give Nate a chance to jump back into the phones, unless there is anything else huge that you feel just needs to be said in this space.
Yeah, we're ready, but go ahead, Dianna.
Yeah, I did want to comment on the abortion thing. I think a lot of cis people get confused because the motivation for making these abortion restrictions is absolutely about controlling women's bodies. It is based out of misogyny, but it doesn't just affect women. And I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah.
Right, where like the motivations are coming from misogyny. That's absolutely okay to call out. But just don't say that everybody affected is a woman.
No, important to say. And, again, we're never going to be angry at somebody for stumbling over a word. We had a conversation with our first caller, Lee, and perhaps the most important idea that I wanted to leave with Lee was just the significance of not being harsh on yourself here, because when you start to beat yourself up, you only create more anxiety and more tension, and you increase the likelihood of making a mistake. I mean, this is the basic notion of self-compassion. And so if somebody stumbles over some of these words, that's fine. I'm perfectly okay with that. That doesn't mean it isn't important to continue trying and to continue to emphasize the significance of language as we have these conversations.
Yeah, of course. Like, one thing that I've said when talking to trans or NB people, especially with RFR, is that intent is everything. So, if your family that you've just presented new information to is stumbling over your pronouns or dead naming you or whatever, but their intent and if their intent is good, if they're noble, if they apologize when they do it, right? Like, you don't owe it to them to let it go, but you might want to consider cutting them some slack if their intent is good. And their intent is going to be pretty easy to suss out. You're going to know what they mean, I think, 9 times out of 10.
Fair to say.
But yes, we do have callers on the line. We do have another note from the mailbag that I think we can probably wrap up pretty quick. So Jared and Al, hold on. Your turn is coming. Okay. Hold on. We are going to get to you real soon. But one real quick item from the mailbag that I want to get to here, if I can bring this up. I am the worst co-host ever. Okay, so question from our mailbag. Can somebody be non-binary and or gender fluid and still use she, her pronouns? Is it wrong? This is a bit of a non sequitur. Is it wrong for the big bad evil person of a story or a game to be a perfect example of someone who is gender fluid or non-binary. And the example they give is a shapeshifter like Mystique from the X-Men. This stems from an online role-playing game our writer is playing, and they don't want to feed into negative stereotypes about the LGBTQ community. That we appreciate. Dianna, what do you think?
Yeah, on the first one, yes, absolutely. You use what pronouns feel most comfortable for you. I know lots of people who are non-binary who still use she, her, who use she, they, whatever. You're good. You're fine. As far as the big bad question, my main thing with that sort of thing is to make sure that the evilness of that person isn't extending from their identity as a marginalized person. Like, the reason that they're being portrayed as evil isn't because they're trans or non-binary. I think perhaps one of the most famous examples is the Ace Ventura Pet Detective, where the big bad in that movie is a trans woman, and that is the entire basis for her being seen as evil throughout it. And it's absolutely horrible and transphobic. But if you have a villain who just happens to be this sort of identity, that's fine. I mean, there can be bad trans people. There can be bad non-binary people. It's a thing. We don't have to be like these good paragons of it. I think of how, like, Ursula, I believe, from The Little Mermaid was purposefully modeled like on Divine as like a
very queer coded.
Yes.
And I freaking love her. Because it allows her, it's
Ursula.
Yeah. And it's not because she's modeled on like this drag queen aspect that she's bad. It's like that's just part of her fabulousness. So
absolutely. You literally stole the words.
If we wanted to do an
mouth
entire episode just breaking down the gender implications and the political implications of Disney's The Little Mermaid, we can absolutely do that show. I'm here for it. But no,
can I be on
tonight,
that show,
I agree
Christy?
completely. Yeah, I think when we talk about like villains being queer coded and these different things and wanting to not have queer villains and all of that, it's more about not having all of our villains be queer, right?
Yes.
It's about not having the only representations of queer people being villains. Certainly, there are queer folks that are assholes. I can recommend plenty of people to fit that stereotype. It's absolutely true. There are plenty of cis people that are assholes.
Podcast, Christy.
Yeah, it's a real thing. I mean, queer folks can be anything else. I think the challenge is in making sure that that's not the only view. And, if you are putting together a game night, or if you are, writing your Dungeons and Dragons quest, like, whatever character you want to use is fine and great and wonderful. Just be mindful of the fact that so many queer folks never get to see themselves represented in these things as anything other than the bad guy. So that doesn't mean that you can't have a queer bad guy. Just keep all of that in mind.
Yeah,
but
I think we nailed that one. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, who else you got for us on the line?
We have Jared, who's been waiting for quite some time, and I want to thank Jared for his patience. Jared wants to know, Jared, I'll just let you ask it yourself. You're on with Dianna, Christy, and Nate.
Hey, well, I was just curious. The more that I understand about like being queer, the more that I seem to like learn about the fact that you can have more than one sexuality. And so I was curious to find out like what your guys' take was on like having multiple sexualities.
Sure.
Yeah, I may need you to define your terms a little bit, because if we think of somebody as having the sexuality of being attracted to somebody of the same gender and the sexuality of being attracted to somebody of the opposite gender, then we might call that person bisexual. And so we might say that they have a bisexual sexuality. When you say multiple sexualities, tell me what you mean by that idea.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so not to be weird, but have you guys ever heard of like autosexual?
No, you may have to walk us through it a little bit.
Okay, cool. So autosexual is that you are attracted to basically yourself. So like if you are, so like you're like, for me, I am a cis male. And so for me, I always thought that, well, society pressures, like I felt like I was going to be straight. And so like for a long time, I felt like I was bisexual. And then as I understood, like, and accepted who I was, I realized I wasn't bisexual. I said I was gay. But then as I continued to understand sexuality, I started to understand, like, and realize that, like, I was more autosexual, that I was sexually attracted to myself rather than other men. And like, meaning that, like, I feel like I have more of a, like, it's along the asexual spectrum.
Sure.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah,
so
I was already thinking that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, I feel like my primary sexuality would be autosexual, but if I was going to be including more than just myself, I would say that I am gay. And so I feel like that kind of broke my brain, because I was like, wait, if you're attracted to yourself first, like,
Sure.
What's the deal? Like, does that mean that you can have more than one sexuality? And I started diving into that, and I started reading and seeing other people that talked about having multiple sexualities. And so I was curious, because I was always in the fundamental, like, belief of, oh, well, if you like a guy and you are a girl, then you are straight. If you are a guy who likes a guy and a girl, you're bi. If you are, and like that whole like mindset of, well, there is a shoe, and if you have this sexuality, that is what you are, rather than saying you have this that you're primarily attracted to, but you also have a secondary attraction or a third attraction to other genders. And so I was just curious, like, what your guys' thoughts were as far as that went.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you're describing what I might call like the gray specs, like the gray sexual spectrum, might be the best framework for how to understand this. Like, you might be on that asexual spectrum, but, you know, perhaps on like the far end of it that includes autosexuality and maybe even like a pinch of homosexuality. In any case, we're just using words to describe things. The thing is the thing. And whatever language we drag it through does not define it. It just is a way of trying to describe it. These words serve the thing. The thing does not serve the words. So yeah, in that sense, if you want to think about yourself in terms of having multiple sexualities, I'm totally on board with that. I'm reminded of the notion of the gender unicorn, which, if you haven't seen for yourself, is a great little illustration of this idea. It points out the fact that there are multiple spectrums that define a person's gender or a person's attractions or their romantic interest and all of these different things. And, you know, ultimately, though, however you choose to identify, whatever words best fit you, whatever sounds you can make come out of your mouth that enable a different person to take the idea that you're forming in your head and then somehow form it in their head, those are the words that you should use. These words are here to serve us.
Yeah, and
No, can I chime in really quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, no, I wanted to say I 100% agree with you. I think for me, like, in accepting who I am, there was a big portion of me that, like, wanted to find the right and proper term to describe 100% of who I am, which is, now I just feel like I just say I'm queer. Like, I just feel like it's comfortable. I am happy saying I'm queer. Like, it feels more true. And so I would say that there's one of the part of me that looks at it and says, like, why does it matter? Like, it's just a word. But then there's also the side of me that was the new to understanding sexuality that needed a word to latch onto to finally accept what I was feeling and validate what I was feeling. And so, does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to reassure you that there is precedence within the queer community for people identifying under multiple different labels. When you first said multiple sexualities, what popped into my head was bisexual lesbians. They are bi women who acknowledge that they have attraction to men, but they don't act on that. They make an active decision to mostly date women, to date outside of that cis male area and stuff. And so they are bisexual in terms of their like base sexuality, but they are lesbians in action. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, because I feel like at that point, for me, if I can chime in on that, that sounds like a little bit of like, and not to be like vulgar or whatever. One of the things for
It's
me
Thursday.
struggling
It's
with-
Thursday, Jared. Get as dirty as you want to be.
Oh, thank God. Thank God. Because I was just like, is this a sexuality or is this a fetish? And so it was trying to like struggle to understand and just accept that like, hey, you are who you are. Like, and that's why I just say I'm queer.
Yeah.
I'm queer.
Yeah.
I know I'm not straight. Like that's good enough for me.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people's exploration of their sexuality starts with like, well, I must be what everybody else is. I'm straight, right? Oh no, maybe I'm queer and questioning. And then you start to grab a label and it starts to fit. And then you grab another label and then you find yourself on message boards and forums and Facebook groups and on Twitter, and you're accruing more and more and more and more of these labels. And then you come right back around to saying, nah, I'm queer. And, you know, that doesn't describe everybody's journey, but I'll definitely say that you're in good company to both want to understand all of these labels and to, accrue them like they're infinity stones so that you can be like fully in your power to be able to describe your gender and your romance and your sexuality and all of these things. But ultimately, for the most part, yeah, I tell people I'm queer because I just don't have that many adjectives to offer people. And that's okay too, because a lot of these terms are going to shift and change and be fluid. And that's all right too.
Well,
Yeah.
No, and I 100% agree with you on that one. And that's one of the things that like kind of kills me about like when people are like, oh, the Q is for questioning. And I'm like, if you're questioning, you're queer. Like, I hate to be that guy. If you're questioning, but you're a part of our community.
Yeah, exactly.
To some extent.
If I might, since I'm surrounded by PhDs, I thought I might quote another PhD that's okay, well, you're almost there, Christy. I believe in you. But something that the founder of this podcast, Dr. Daryl Ray, has said is that you are your first and best sexual partner. So being attracted to yourself, finding yourself sexy, it's not something to be ashamed of. In fact, it's almost a prerequisite to having a healthy relationship with another person. So, you know, don't feel like there's some sort of stigma around being autosexual or finding yourself attractive. I mean, I do it every day. So
I know. And the pandemic was a blessing. I was just like,
all right. And the other thing I want to say, like personally, the way that I've tried to describe attraction and sexuality to people is like, it's kind of like a dimmer switch, right? Like there's an infinite amount of numbers between 0 and 1. Right on that number line, you can go 0.1, 0.11, 0.112, 0.113, and there's literally an infinite amount of settings on that line as you go from left to right. So to try to find a label for each and every single one kind of is never going to happen. And if you are comfortable with the catch-all term queer, then go with it, you know? What?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've said it, and it's been a while since I've gotten yelled at for saying it. But it's my sincere belief that if there are some 7.5 billion people on this planet, there are 7.5 billion genders, 7.5 billion sexualities.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing? I know that
may.
you're late, and so I'm not trying to take your time, so I apologize. But no,
You're good.
like that is one of the things that like I feel like the more I understand sexuality, the more I say like everybody is queer. Like society says that like that you're not queer, but like you had that feeling towards somebody of the same gender at some point, and you just didn't understand what it meant. And I feel like the more that I understand, the more that I see that like the extreme, I am 100% not attracted to my gender versus I am 100% attracted to, and vice versa. And I am so sorry because I did not realize. I hope that that's not like an offensive analogy for a non-binary person. I am so sorry about that.
No.
Is that okay? Oh, thank God. I'm a Papa Bear, and so I always get very defensive over like my trans friends, and I don't have too many different non-binary, and so I always like after I say something, I'm like, oh God, was I just ignorant? So okay.
My joke is always, if you're attracted to me, you're gay.
I like it.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Well, Jared, we're going to move on, but I want to thank you very much for calling in. This was a great conversation and a great call. And I hope you found this instructive, and I hope you have a great night.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. You guys take care. Thank you, and keep doing what you're doing.
Hey, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do you think we can try to sneak in one more before we start to wrap up for the night?
I think we owe it to Al, who is called in from a land down under and has been waiting very patiently for an hour. And she wants to talk about abortion, gender, inclusive language. Am I close? Al, you are on the line.
Pretty close, yeah, Nate. How you going?
Going well, going well. Glad to have you on the show. I appreciate your patience. We wanted to get in this this call before we wrap up. So tell us what's on your mind.
Well, you already touched on it quite a bit there, and I certainly don't want Christy to unplug his microphone again. But,
no, that'll fill out too many secular sexuality bingo cards if he does that again.
Yeah. Keep my hands on the table.
I was having a conversation on Discord the other day about the subject of abortion came up, and I perhaps overreacted a little bit, got a little bit triggered because the conversation always seems to be monopolised by cis men. And I kind of went, oh, look, here we go again. Blokes talking about what it's like to be pregnant and stuff. And I kind of just, my instinctual reaction has always been, look, no uterus, no opinion. And while that still kind of feels holistically correct, I also don't want to exclude people who are gender diverse. So how do you explore those nuances without being exclusionary?
Well, if I could offer an early opinion, and then I'll turn it over to my panel of experts. I'm of the opinion that a man has to earn his right to weigh in on the issue of abortion, because it is the woman's decision. If they are in a relationship, if they trust each other, if they love each other, then you're going to take your spouse's or your partner's opinions and feelings into consideration, right? That's just a normal part of a human relationship. I myself have 3 children. My ex-partner and I endured some rocky times, and the issue of abortion came up more than once, and I offered my input, but it was always with the understanding that it wasn't my decision. I could respectively, petition for my opinion and my preference to be weighed, but ultimately it is not up to us. So yes, I think that if it's correct, then yeah, the man should have a choice and has a right to at least offer his partner what he thinks. And it is completely the woman's choice whether to take it or not. Guys, what do you think?
Sorry, I did want.
No, I just completely agree. Yes, these decisions impact men. And when we're talking about the larger abortion debate, there are plenty of educated and informed male doctors that are weighing in. There are more than enough male politicians and legislators that are involved in these discussions. And yes, men should be included in those conversations, but
they're
that
not in
doesn't
charge.
mean that. Yeah, that doesn't mean that men are making these decisions or should be making these decisions. Ultimately, when we're talking about an individual, we're talking about the person carrying that baby. So whether that person is a man, woman, or otherwise, that's the person that should be making their healthcare decisions. Larger policy issues. I mean, we are a society and we can all weigh in, but it is really, really telling the types of people that are pushing a lot of these arguments. And to not recognize at this stage, at this point in 2021, the absolute patriarchal smokescreen that is the so-called abortion debate is just laughable on its face. I guess I'll say very briefly before I accidentally unplug my microphone or carry us too late over time on this podcast, that I got to be on Talk Heathen last Sunday, and a lot of these questions came up, and we were trying to have a civil conversation. We were trying to wrap up the conversation quickly, and I wasn't leading that conversation, but as we were getting ready to hang up, the caller pointed out that, like, well, I don't really feel like gender needs to enter into this discussion, and fuck you. I'm so sorry I didn't get to say it then and there. I think that is absolutely preposterous. These are conversations about gender. Yes, men can have babies. That needs to be a nuanced part of this. And yes, there are male partners, men that are partnered to women that are impacted by these decisions. Yes, gender is a major factor in all of this, but ultimately, a person carrying a baby should have a person carrying a baby, a person carrying a fetus, a person who is becoming pregnant should have the rights to make their choices about their body.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
And I do want to say, like, no uterus, no opinion. I am fine with that because, like, the thing that I have is a uterus. I'm not a woman, but I do have those parts. So, like, somebody who doesn't have a uterus doesn't get say over if I ever am in that position to make that decision. So, like, as far as, like, gender inclusive, I actually prefer no uterus, no opinion.
Fair to say.
I'd rephrase that to no uterus, no decision.
Yes, that could
be.
Sure.
But I can definitely see where you're going there, and in the current climate of patriarchal decisions and draconian laws regarding what women choose to do with their bodies, I can definitely understand that y'all want to take some ground back. But yeah, absolutely. Al, what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all three of you, and I do agree with that nuance that you pointed out, Nate, that maybe no uterus, no decision is a better way to put it. I perhaps just, like I said, I kind of overreacted, and I think it's just men in the Discord were kind of like, oh, God, an angry lesbian. And I said, look, I'm sorry, I overreacted, I got a bit triggered. But I think it's more just, I feel like it's not something that really affects us here in Australia. I can't even imagine how oppressive it must feel for the people in Texas. Doesn't often come up in my country. It's never really been an issue since I've been an adult anyway. But more just that everything I've seen, because I watch a lot of content similar to this, has been about the abortion laws in Texas, and it's just I'm not hearing from people with uteruses. The conversation's being monopolised, and I thought, well, is the conversation being monopolised because the people with uteruses aren't butting in and saying, hey, how about you ask me? So that was kind of the reason I rang up to say,
the fact that the problem here is not that there aren't women with opinions. That's not the issue.
No shit.
If it's not that our legislator, it's not that our attorney general, it's not that these folks can't find women to talk to about these problems. I'll give you a couple of guesses as to what the problem actually is, but the lack of qualified women to discuss the issue, that's not the problem. I'll say that for sure. But Al, I really appreciate your point of view and just giving us the opportunity to say something that should be so obvious, but needs to be said over and over and over, obviously, because of the message that's currently prevailing in our culture.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate time.
Thank you for waiting and thank you for asking that pressing question. That was a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Dianna.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care. All right. Well, we're getting a little bit long here, but I want to make sure
we've had some great calls though, Christy. Come on, this has been a great talk. Yeah.
No regrets. No regrets. Just to say that I want to make sure to highlight a couple of resources. This I guess I didn't mention what's turning me on this week, but I might say that it's the app Plume, Plume. I believe it perhaps used to be called Mariposa. It is a great app to help folks who don't have regular access to HRT and other gender affirming cares to have the opportunity from their own phone to access some of these things. It's a poor substitute, I want to say, for a well-staffed gender affirming clinic, but it's the substitute that I think a lot of people need right now. So I want to make sure to highlight that as an organization. Otherwise, I want to ask Dianna, like, what kinds of resources can non-binary folks or just plain old allies be looking at in order to be part of the solution here?
Yeah, there are a couple of, that app is a great one for like self-managed care and stuff like that, and discussing other like transition specific support things for non-binaries. I've given you a couple of Facebook links. There's a non-binary top surgery removal / reduction Facebook group that was actually recommended to me by my gender care coordinator here in Minnesota and stuff. When I started asking them about like, how do I go about this and stuff, they were like, here are some support groups that are helpful and stuff. So those sorts of things are actually, you can say doctor recommended, is to find that community of people and stuff. So there are a couple of different Facebook groups. Hit me up on Twitter if you need, like, I'm willing to put out feelers for like state specific support and stuff, because in the US it varies by state a lot of times, and I can get you connected with people and stuff. So if you want to hit me up on Twitter too, that works. It's my name with an E in the middle, Dianna E. Anderson.
Perfect. Well, yeah, we'll take a moment to look at some of your links and help people find you online. But before we do you have any final words that you want to leave with the audience tonight? I know we've been talking about some very big ideas, some very obviously like hot issues, but anything in particular you want to make sure to leave people on people's minds tonight?
Yeah, I would want to say that when it comes to healthcare specifically, don't assume what a person needs. Let them direct their care as best you can, especially if you are a healthcare provider. If you are an ally of somebody who is seeking transition care, ask them what they need, what kind of support they want, and stuff, and what sort of ways that you can partner with them in that care. If you are non-binary, remember that you are the expert on yourself. You know yourself best. You know what you want, what you need, and you can ask for it. And you don't have to do like all these transition things to like be fully trans enough or whatever. There's no such thing. If you're trans, you're trans. If you're non-binary, you're non-binary. Whatever you decide is your category, that's your category.
That person-centered language is so crucial. Thank you for continuing to highlight that.
Brilliant.
And I hate to interrupt, but a friend just came over to say hi.
Never an interruption.
Minerva.
Oh, my Minerva?
Uh-huh.
I love it.
That's great.
I love it. Minerva doesn't look all too happy, but she still looks
No.
adorable.
No, she never looks happy.
Well, at least she stayed off your keyboard for the duration of the podcast.
Yes.
That is a plus. Okay, so I guess we're going to wrap it up for the evening. If we could get Dianna's links up, folks, they have already said they're willing to engage with you. So send them a tweet, send them a message, looking for advice, looking for a conversation. Let's deluge Dianna and show her that the secular sexuality audience wants to engage. And that is such a great picture. Oh my God. Wow.
Thank you.
With a nice coif. Love it.
Yes, it's amazing. Also, folks, the entire atheist community of Austin family of content is available. So apparently there are other shows that the ACA does. I haven't heard of any of them.
I don't like any of them. They talk about vaginas too much.
Yeah. And that nonprofit show with that Johnny guy, like, oh, that guy is the worst. But if you want to dip your toes into the ACA family, tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. And if you want to get involved more with secular sexuality on Facebook, we have a fan group. The hosts are there. The fans are there. Hit us up, folks. If you want to continue this conversation in the after show, if you would like a community of secular, critical thinking, brilliant mofos on Discord, the official, unofficial server of the ACA's tiny.cc/ACD Discord. So feel free to continue the conversation. We're all going to be on there for a little bit after the show, chatting with folks. And we also have merch. We have t-shirts. We have coffee cups. We have bumper stickers, probably. We have all kinds of things. We have stickers you can stick anywhere on your body at tiny.cc/merchaca. And most importantly, before we go out, we have the wonderful, amazing people who do all the work behind the scenes so that jerks like us can talk for an hour and a half. Look at you guys. Oh, we have kitties. We have more kitties. Oh, yeah, I needed more kitties. That's okay. Thank you, crew. We appreciate everything you guys do to make this show a reality. Christy, you want to take us out?
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of really big ideas. We've talked about some very important stuff, some very scary stuff, as well as I hope some encouraging ideas about what we might be able to hope for in the future. But either way, it's probably a good time to cut yourself a little slack, to give yourself a nice little break, and maybe even to give yourself a nice big old orgasm. Or, better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.